have invented a new way to teach algebra, and I'm curious if my new method of teaching algebra is effective in raising test scores. I want to design an experiment to test this. Fortunately for me, I have 500 Baltimore County Public School 8th graders to use in my experiment. Now I have these 500 students. How do you suppose we figure out, or we design an experiment to see if my method is truly going to raise their test scores? Well, I don't want to put all 500 students in the new strategy or new method of teaching, because then I wouldn't have anyone to compare these 500 students to. So I want to split them up into two groups, some that experience the new method of teaching and some that experience the traditional method of teaching algebra. If I just took the roster and put the first 250 students on the class rosters in one room and the 250 students on the end of the class roster in another room, or another class that has the traditional method, I might inadvertently split the class up in a way where I put the smarter kids in one room and the kids that aren't as great at algebra in the other room. And essentially, I would not have observed whether or not the teaching method was effective. The end of my results would just be that I have the smarter kids in one room. To avoid this, we need to figure out a way to divide the students up. One simple way of doing this is to flip a coin. So when students come in to school, you would flip a coin on the first day to determine whether or not they would be exposed to the new teaching method or the traditional method. What this does is randomize our students into one of two groups. This randomization will help to ensure that all the internal biases that are in our group are controlled for. So approximately 250 students, if we flipped a coin, would end up in the new method, and then 250 students would end up in classrooms where the traditional method of algebra is used. Now, this is an investment in time because I would have to wait a specific amount of time, let's say an entire school year. And how would I determine at the end if my students had an improvement? Well, unfortunately, we would have to test them. So we'd give the two groups of students the same test. Mark them and see how they do on the test, and then it'll give us the means to compare the two groups. After the tests were graded, we find that the traditional method classrooms scored on average 80 on their test. And our new method scored on average 84, the students that were exposed to the new method. Now the question then becomes, is this a reasonable enough difference between the two groups to say that my new method is truly effective in raising test scores? It's hard to tell, and that's what the rest of this course will be about, is how to make that judgment of whether or not we see a significant increase in the test scores. Now let's suppose that the average test score for the traditional method was 70, and the new method, still, their average score was 84. That one's easier to believe that there's been a significant increase. But there may be a significant increase with just the 84 over the 80. Again, that's what we're going to learn this semester when we get to a later module.